Quick demo of this video tutorial. In this video, we will implement JWT Authentication, Login and Logout in ASP.NET Core Web API project with Angular 7. So here we have the final project after implementing JWT User Authentication. In order to show you the demo of this application, first of all, let me sign up a new user. Username will be Maria123 Maria Rodriguez. Password will be 1234. Finally, submit the form. So here we have successfully created the user record for Maria. Username is Maria123, then password will be 1234. Hit enter. So here we have successfully authenticated inside this application using JWT Auth system. Inside this home page, we have shown the details of currently logged in user Maria Rodriguez. In order to sign out from this application, you can use this logout button here. So inside this application, we have discussed a lot of things, starting from what is meant by JSON Web Token Authentication, how to implement JSON Web Token Authentication inside ASP.NET Core Web API project, how to design this login form in Angular 7, how to consume secure .NET Core Web API method from Angular 7, and we have demonstrated the integrity and security of JSON Web Token using this application. In short, we will cover complete JSON Web Token authentication in .NET Core Web API with Angular 7. So please watch till the end of this video tutorial. Before starting this video, I would like to ask you a favor. If you found this video helpful, please thumbs up this video. If you are new here, please be subscribed to this channel and click on the bell icon to get notification about my new videos. Most of the video lesson here also has a written blog post. You can find the link in video description. You can grab code from there as well. What's up YouTube? Welcome to CodAffection. In this video, we are going to implement JWT User Authentication in ASP.NET Core Web API using Angular 7. In previous video, we have discussed how to implement user registration in ASP.NET Core Web API using Angular 7 and Identity Core. So in this video, we are going to update both .NET Core Web API and Angular 7 project from previous tutorial to implement JSON Web Token Authentication. So before watching this authentication, login and logout tutorial, please watch user registration tutorial. I have given the link in first comment and video description. Before getting started with this topic, I would like to thank for your PayPal donations for my previous works. In order to make more helpful and quality tutorials like this, you can support me through PayPal donation. I have given the donation link in first comment and video description. Without further ado, let's get started. So here we have the previous Angular 7 user registration application for client side. Currently this application looks like this. Into this application we have to accommodate a login form also. After that we can update .NET Core Web API for JWT authentication. So here we have the current application structure. Under this user parent component we have to create one more component for login form. So here we have the component login. Now let's create this component. For that, I'm gonna open one more terminal here. Then we have to use this Angular CLI command, ng g for generate, c for component, and we have to create this component under this user parent component. Component name will be login, and we have to skip the creation of spec file, which is for test purpose. I will reset this flag as false. And we want to skip the creation of component specific style sheet. For that, you can add this flag here, --yes. Hit enter. Newly created component can be seen inside this login folder here. We have one TypeScript file and one HTML file. Now we have to update application routing for this newly created component. So here we have the routing module, app routing module. Like this registration route, let me add one more children route here. I will copy paste that here. This is for login, so path will be login, then component will be login component. We have shown this registration component HTML inside this user component HTML here with this router outlet tag. Instead of that, inside this user component, we have to show HTML from both components, registration component and login component. So I'm gonna do that with tab control. So first of all, let me get rid of this existing HTML from here. First of all, we need a div with class wrapper. Inside that, we need another div with class wrapper-div. Inside that, we have another div with class tab header. Inside this div, we can have hyperlink for sign in and sign up. First of all, we have an h2 header. For this element, we have to specify the hyperlink reference, in short href, which can be specified using Angular attribute router link. So here it is, router link, and here we have to specify the route that we have configured for the login component. So it will be something like this, /user/login. When we navigate inside this route here, we have to set the class active for this h2 element. For that, we can use this attribute router link active is equal to, here we have to specify the route that we have to add. So it will be active. Inside this hyperlink, text will be sign in. Like this, we have to create one more h2 header. So let me copy this and pasting below that. Router link will be something like this, /user/registration. Corresponding text will be sign up. Just below this div, we have to show the component HTML based on the active tab. For that, we will have another div with class raw. Inside that, we will have another div with class called md-10, and we need an offset of one column, so we have to specify this class offset md1. Inside this, we will have this router outlet tag. So based on the active tab here, corresponding component HTML will be replaced inside this router outlet tag here. Now let me update the global style sheet here, styles.css. Let me remove existing CSS rules, then I will paste the new rules here. Let me save all of these modifications, then back to the application here. Currently our application looks like this. We have to do few more modifications. Before that, inside this registration component form, we don't need this header anymore. So let me get rid of this header. So inside this registration component HTML, I will remove this div from here. We only need this form for user registration. Let me save this, then back to the application. So that's it. There are some disalignments inside the application. Caching of previous global style sheet might cause this problem. So let me clear the browser cache. For that, let's go to the history tab here and click on this clear browsing data. Inside this advanced tab, I have selected all time as time range, and I have selected this option cached image and files to be cleaned. Click on clean data. That's it. Now back to the application, reload this page. Inside this user component, here we have some typo. Instead of wrapper div, it should be wrap div. Instead of tab header, it should be tab header. Let me save all of these modifications here. Then back to the application. Boom, that's it. So inside this sign up form here, we have the user registration form that we have implemented in previous video. And inside this sign in tab here, we have to show a login form for user authentication. Inside this tab, you can already see the default HTML from login component. Now let's update the default HTML inside the login component HTML. Let me get rid of this default paragraph from here. First of all, we need a form. We don't need this action attribute here. Let me get rid of that. Instead of that, I will add a local reference form. Inside this login form, we will have two controls, one for username, one for password. If the form is complex or which is to be scaled in future, then reactive forms approach would be a better option. So here we have a local reference form which is equal to ng form. And I want to add a single class for this form. So class is equal to mb, which applies margin bottom of the size 4. And I want to prevent the autocomplete from previous posted form data, so we can set this property autocomplete as off. Inside this form, first of all, we will have a div with class form-group. Inside this div, we will have controls for username. So first of all, we have the label. We don't need this for attribute here. Label text will be something like this, username. After that, we have to have the input control, input. We don't need this type attribute. By default, it would be text. In order to design this template driven form, we need a component property. So I will define the property here, form model. It will contain properties like username and password. Username, and I will initialize this property with empty string. After that, we have password, which is equal to empty string. Now using this form model property, we can bind input controls inside the form here. So first of all, I will set the local reference username is equal to ng model. After that, we have to set the name attribute. It will be username. Then we have the two-way data binding ng model is equal to form model dot username. We need one more form group div for password also. So I am going to replicate this selection here. So you can use this shortcut Alt Shift then downward arrow. Instead of username, we have password, then we have local reference, then name attribute, two-way data binding. After all of these input controls, we need a submit button for the form. For that, I will copy this registration sign up button from the corresponding component HTML here. Let me copy this div from here. Then I will paste that here. We don't need this disabled attribute. After that, we need to change this button text. It will be login. Since we have designed this form using template driven approach, we have to add the corresponding module inside app module.ts file here. So we have to import forms module here, forms module. Let's add the same class inside this imports array here. Let me save all of these modifications here, then back to the application. Inside the sign-in tab, we should have a login form. Sorry, we forgot to add bootstrap class form control into these text boxes here. So back to the component HTML. Let's add the corresponding class. It will be form-control. Let me copy this and pasting here for password. Let me save this, back to the application. Boom. So here we have the sign-in form with username and password text box. Now just above the login form here, we need an image. So first of all, let's add that image inside this assets folder img here. So here is the image. Let me drag that and place inside this img folder here. Just above this form element here, we need an img control. Corresponding path will be something like this: /assets/img. Inside that we have this image on single user.png. For this img control, we have few classes. So class is equal to, so here we have the class mx-auto. It will align the image in center, horizontal center. After that we have dblock. It will set the display as block. Let me save this, then back to the application here. That's it. Now I want to set this password text box type as password so that characters entered into this text box will be hidden. So back to the component HTML here, then I will set the type here. Type is equal to password. Save this, back to the application. Now I want to implement form validation for these two input controls here. Both of these, username and password, is mandatory for this form submission. So I'm going to add the required attribute for both of these controls here. Required same can be added to the next password text box here. We are not going to show the validation error indication. We just disable this login button when this form as a whole is not valid. So we can add the disabled attribute for this submit button here. We will add this disabled attribute whenever this form as a whole is not valid. In order to reference this form, here we have the local reference form. So we just need to do this form.invalid. Let me save this. Back to the application here. Initially you can see this blurred submit button login here. If you populate these form controls properly, then this submit button will be enabled. For now we can stop the Angular development. Let's switch into Web API project from previous tutorial, where we have to implement the JSON Web Token authentication. So here we have the .NET Core Web API project from previous user registration part. Before updating this project, let's check what is meant by JWT Authentication and how it works. For that, you can go to this website jwt.io. So this is the official website for JWT. You can go to this introduction for more information about this authentication. Here you can see the definition. JSON Web Token is an open standard that defines a compact and self-contained way of securely transmitting information between parties as a JSON. As per the definition, JWT is an open standard which provides a secure way of transmitting information between two parties as JSON object. For example, if you go to this debugger here, you can see the sample JSON object string here. It has three parts. The first thread part is called header, and this is called payload, and here we have the signature. All of these three parts are separated with a period in between them. We will discuss what we meant by these sections, header, payload and signature, in a bit. Before that, let's discuss JWT authentication flowchart. So first of all, on the left side we have the client-side application, which is the Angular 7 application, and here we have the server, which is the web API implemented in ASP.NET Core. So first of all, from this Angular 7 application, we will send a request with credentials like username and password, which will be sent as a result of this login form submission here. So upon receiving that request at the server side, JWT Auth system will return a JSON Web Token if there is a user with given credentials, username and password. So as a result of this request and response, we will have a JSON Web Token in client side, which will be stored inside this Angular 7 application in browser local storage. That JSON Web Token will be similar to this one here. After this successful authentication, we have to append this JSON Web Token for all the subsequent requests which demand authentication. Upon receiving this request at server side, it will extract the JSON Web Token and it will verify the token. Basically, inside this token, we have information about the user. Along with these details, we will have an expiration time. So if the token is expired, this request will fail. If there is a manipulation inside this token which we have saved inside the browser local storage, which can be identified by the JSON auth system. If the token verification is successful, it will process the resource and it will return the response back to the server. So this is the workflow of JSON Web Token auth system. Now let's briefly discuss the structure of the token. Mainly it consists of three parts: header, then we have payload, and finally we have the signature. All of these parts are separated with a period in between them. Inside the header, we will have these two informations: type and algorithm. Inside the type attribute, we have JWT, means data stored inside the JSON is a JSON Web Token. And inside this ALG attribute, which stands for algorithm, means we have shown this signature last part of the JSON Web Token as a result of encryption. That encryption algorithm should be mentioned inside this attribute ALG here. In most of the case, we will use SHA-256 algorithm or RSA algorithm. So here we have used SHA-256 algorithm. And here we have the second part of the token, which is payload. Inside this payload, we will store information about the token or user. During token generation, there will be some default claims such as issued at, means time at which this token is generated. Then we will have the expiration time at which this token will be expired. Like that, there might be some default claims. Other than that, we developers can define or store some custom claims related to user, such as user ID, role, etc. And keep in mind that you only want to store required data inside the token. Otherwise, bandwidth consumed for the transmission of the token will be higher. Other than that, inside the payload, do not store security data like password, because both of these parts, header and payload, are represented as a result of base64 URL encoding. And thereby, these two parts, header and payload, can be easily decoded at the client side. So better avoid storing security data inside the payload part. Now we have the final part of the token, which is signature, which is responsible for the integrity and security of the token, which is generated as a result of the encryption here. First of all, we will encode both header and payload using base64 URL encoding, and we will separate them with a period in between them. So this string here is same as that of the first two parts here. Okay, and we will encrypt this result using SHA-256 algorithm. For this encryption, we will use a secret code. So this secret will be stored only at server side. It should not be disclosed to anyone outside. And finally, we will concat this encryption result into this existing token here. So this is how the JWT token is generated. Once it is issued, it will be stored at the client side browser. And we have to append this token for further subsequent requests which demand authentication. At the server side, this token will be verified. As a part of that, first of all, it will decode these two parts here, header and payload, which we have encoded during generation. So inside this payload, we will have the expiration time. If the token is expired, this verification will fail. If there is a manipulation from client side for this token, because this token will be saved inside the local storage, so anyone can manipulate this data. But upon receiving the token at server side, it can check the integrity of the token, because both of these header and payload are encrypted inside this last signature part here. If there is a modification in any of these parts, which can be compared inside the original data from this signature part here. So that's all about JSON Web Token. As per the definition here, you can see that it is a standard. It defines how the JSON Web Token is to be implemented. In order to implement this JSON Web Token in a technology, we have to depend on providers. For that, you can go to these libraries here. Depending on the development environment, we have different packages here. For .NET framework applications, we have these much packages, and for Python, we have different packages like that. Depending on the development environment, we have different packages to implement this open standard for JSON Web Token. So let's look how we can implement JSON Web Token user authentication inside this .NET Core Web API project here. So here we have the .NET Core Web API project from previous user registration tutorial. Inside this startup class function configuration services, we have to configure this application for JSON Web Token authentication. For that, we have to call the add authentication function from this services variable. So add authentication. Inside this function, we have to configure the application for JSON Web Token. So inside this function, we will have a lambda expression with parameter x. So basically inside this function, we will set different types of authentication schema as JSON Web Token authentication. So first of all, we have default authenticate schema, and we want to set that as JSON Web Token authentication. So we just need to do this JWT bearer defaults, and we have to add this namespace Microsoft ASP.NET Core authentication.jwt bearer. Inside that we have this authentication schema. Like this, we have to set few more authentication schemas. So let me copy this and pasting below that 2 times. This time, instead of this default authentication schema, we have default challenge scheme, and finally we have default scheme. After setting these authentication schemas, we have to configure this JWT itself. For that, we can chain one more function call to this add authentication function. JWT bearer function can be called. Inside this function, we will have another arrow function with parameter x. First of all, we have to reset this property require HTTP metadata as false. Means using this require HTTPS metadata property, we can restrict the authentication resources to only requests which is of the type HTTPS. We don't need that restriction, so we have reset this property. After that, we have this property save token. We have reset that property to false. Means after a successful authentication, whether we want to save that token inside the server or not. We don't need to save the token in server, so we have reset this property as false. Finally, we have to define how do we want to validate a token once it is received from the client side after successful authentications. For that, we can use this property token validation parameters is equal to new token validation parameters. Inside this class, we have to configure a few properties. First of all, we will set this property validate issuer sign-in key as true, so that the system will validate the security key during the token validation. After that, we have to provide the issuer sign-in key, which we have discussed inside the official website documentation. Here we have to provide this secret for the encryption of the signature part in token. So we have to assign the key inside this property issuer sign-in key. Before that, we have to define new variable key, and here I will provide this string for the JSON Web Token encryption. So here it is, at least it should have 16 characters. So I have given 16 digits here. Instead of directly passing this string here, we have to pass the encoded version. So we can do this encoding. For that, we have to add this namespace system.text. From that, we have this UTF-8.get bytes function can be called. Inside that function, we can pass this security secret. Now, in order to assign this key into this property here, we have to create an instance of symmetric security key class. So we can do this new symmetric security key. For that, we have to use this namespace item model.tokens. Inside this instance, we can pass the key that we have defined before. After this property, we have to configure a few more validation parameters. So we have validate issuer, and we will reset that false. And then we have validate audience. We'll reset that false. During generation of a token, we can define the issuer of the token, which means who generated this token. Obviously, it will be a name for server, and inside the audience attribute, we can set the targeted audience for the token. So while receiving the token after successful authentication, we can compare whether we have the same issuer or audience which we have provided during generation of the token. We don't have to validate those properties, issuer and audience, so we have reset the property as false here. Finally, we have to set this property clock skew, and I will set it as time span dot 0. We have assigned this property as 0 time span for checking expiration time of token. There is no time zone difference between server and client side, so we have set this time span as 0. So here we have done with general configuration for authentication with JWT. Now, instead of hard coding this JWT secret code inside this startup file here, we have to move that into this configuration file appsettings.json here. Just below this connection string, I will add another key, application settings. Inside that, we can add a key for JWT secret code. So it will be something like this: JWT underscore secret. And I will copy this and pasting here. Now, in order to access this value from this startup class here, we just need to do this. We have this iConfiguration property configuration. So we just need to do this configuration. Inside that, we can provide the path of this key here. So let me copy this app settings. Here inside app settings, we have another key, JWT secret. Let me copy this and pasting here. That's it. Like this, we can access values from appsettings.json file. Finally, we have to convert this into a string, so we can call this toString function. Now I want to move this client URL into app settings file. We have mentioned this Angular 7 application URL for enabling course. Just below this secret code, I will add another key, client URL. Copy paste this URL. Let me copy this and pasting here. Now, in order to access this value, we can do the same like we have done for secret code. Let me copy this and pasting here. Instead of JWT secret code, we have client URL. Now we have to create a post web API method for user authentication. Into that, we can pass username and password so that we can consume that web API method from this login form submit event. So let's add that web API method inside this controller, application user controller, which we have added in previous tutorial. So I will add a new web API method here, which is of the type HTTP post. Now for this web API method, we have to configure the route like this. Route, it will be login. Now in order to consume this web API method, we have to make a post request with the URI like this, application user /login. And the web API method will be something like this, public async, and its return type will be something like this, task action result, and I will name this method as login. Into this web API method, we have to pass the credentials, username and password. For that, I'm going to create a model class inside this models folder here. Add class. I will name the class as login model. Inside that, we will have string properties for username and password. String, first of all, we have username, and then we have the password. Now we can define a parameter inside this method of the type login model. So here it is, login model, and parameter name will be model. Now inside this function we can do this. First of all, we have injected the user manager as underscore user manager here. We have to use this property in order to check whether we have a user with given username. So I will define a new variable user, which is equal to avoid underscore user manager dot find by name. Async function can be called so that we can get a user using his username. So inside this function we just need to pass the username. After that we can check whether we have a user with given username. So I will add this if clause here. Inside that we will check whether this user variable is null or not. If it is not null, we can say that there is a user with given username, and if there is a user with given username we have to check the password. So we will do this underscore user manager dot check password. Async function can be called. Inside that we have to pass the user password that we can retrieve from model.password property. Since we are calling async function here, we have to add the avoid keyword here also. Sorry, as a first parameter to this function we have to pass the user object also. Now inside this if clause we have to successfully authenticate the user. First of all, I will define a new variable token descriptor is equal to new security token descriptor. For that we have to add this namespace identity model dot tokens. Now into this we have to pass few property values. So first of all we have subject. Inside this subject property we will pass the claims associated with the user. In order to set the claims for the user, you can do this. Claims identity instance can be used. In order to use this class we have to use this namespace security.claims. In order to pass the claims we will use the claim array. For now I just want to save the user ID, so we can do this new. As a first parameter we can set the claim key, which is user ID. As a second parameter we can set the value which we can retrieve from this variable user. So user dot ID, and we want to convert that into string, so toString function can be called. After this subject property we have to set the token expiration time. So expires property can be set here, date time dot UTC. Now from that property I will call this add minutes function. Inside the function I will pass 5. So this token will be expired after 5 minutes of token generation. After this property we have to set sign in credential property. For that we can use the sign in credential instance. As a first parameter we have to pass the sign in secret key, which we have passed here inside this startup class here using this instance symmetric security key instance. Let me copy this and pasting here, and for key we have done this. Let me copy this and replacing this key here. In order to use this encoding class here we have to use this namespace system.text, and we have accessed the JWT secret inside this startup class from this app settings.json. We can't do that same inside this controller. We have to do something different that we can do in a bit. For now I will just pass a hard-coded string here. Let me copy that from here, app settings, and I will paste that here. As a second parameter to this function we have to mention the algorithm that we want to use for encryption of the signature. So we can do this security algorithms dot HMAC SHA-256 signature algorithm can be passed here. So here we have created the variable token descriptor. After that, we have another variable token handler, which is equal to new JWT security token handler. For that, we have to use this namespace identity model.tokens.jwt. After that, we have to create another variable security token. Now we can actually generate the token using the variable token handler dot create token function can be called. Inside that, we have to pass this token descriptor. Now we have to write this token. For that, I will create another variable token is equal to token handler dot write token function can be called. Inside that, we have to pass this security token variable. Finally, we have the return statement. We will call OK function. Inside that, we have to pass the token that we have just created. For that, I will pass an anonymous object token is equal to token. In short, you can pass token here. So here we have successfully authenticated the user using JWT. Now we have to do some modifications for this encryption secret code for JWT, which we have already mentioned inside this configuration file app-settings.json. We can access these values from startup class like we have done here. In order to access the same outside the startup class, we have to inject these information into the application. For that, inside this configuration services function, we just need to do this. Here we are going to inject these app settings. So inject app settings. For that, we just need to do this services dot configure function can be called. Configuration property can be used here, and from that we can call this get section function can be called. Inside that, we have to provide this section name, which is app settings. In order to access these values using strong typing, I'm going to add one more class inside this models folder here. Right click, then add class. I will name this class as application settings. Inside this class, we will add properties corresponding to these keys here. So first of all, we will add the property of the type string, and I will name this property exactly like this, JWT underscore secret. Like this, we have to create one more property for client URL. That's it. Now back to this startup class here. I'm going to mention that class here, application settings. Now in order to access these injected informations from this application user controller, we have to modify this constructor here. So I'm gonna add one more property here. It is of the type iOptions. For that, we have to use this namespace Microsoft extensions.options, which is of the type application settings. I will name this property as app settings. Now in order to assign this value into a property, I'm going to define one more private property here, private read-only application settings, and I will name this property as underscore app settings. We can assign this property here, underscore app settings is equal to app settings. Dot value can be assigned here. So this is how we can inject the application settings section from this app settings.json file. Now we can update this hard-coded secret code here. We just need to do this underscore app settings dot JWT secret. Now we have to test the working of this post web API method login. For that, First of all, we have to run this application without debug mode. For that, go to debug, then start without debugging. So here we have started the web API from this port number. Now in order to test the working of this post web API method, I'm gonna create one more user. So back to the Angular project, here we are inside the sign up form here. So let me create an user for Linda. Username will be Linda123. Full name will be Linda Thomas. Password will be 1234 1234. Now submit the form. So here we have successfully created the user for Linda. Now we can use that same user in order to test the working of this post web API method login. We have not yet implemented this login form submission event. So in order to test the working of this post web API method, I'm going to use this Postman application here. So here we have to make a post request, and corresponding URI will be something like this. Let me copy this. Corresponding URI will be /API/application user/login. Let me copy and pasting here. Now inside this body, we have to provide the user credentials, username and password. So I will use the raw version here, and we have to set JSON here. It will be a JSON object. First of all, we have username. It will be Linda123. After that, we have password. It will be 1234. Now let me send this request. Boom. Inside this response, we have the JWT token. So first of all, here we have the header part. After that, we have payload, and finally we have the signature part here. So here we have a successful authentication. Now this JWT token will be saved inside the browser local storage. We will send that same token for accessing secure or private routes inside the web API project here. Now in order to show you how to access such private or secure routes from this .NET Core application using JWT token, I'm going to create new controller here. So right click on controllers folder, then add controller. I will select API controller empty. I will name this controller as user profile controller. Now inside this controller, I'm going to create a get web API method which will return details of signed in user like full name, email address, username, etc. This web API method will be of the type HTTP GET. We are going to create a secure private web API method. We have to add this attribute authorize. Now we have to add this namespace ASP.NET Core.authorization. Actual web API method will be something like this. Public async. It will return of the type task of object. I will name this web API method as get user profile. So in order to consume this web API method, we have to make a GET request. Corresponding URI will be something like this: API/user profile. Now inside this web API method, we have to return corresponding user details. Now how do we identify the user who made this request? So in order to access these private or secure routes which has this attribute authorized, we have to send the JWT token which we have received during login operation. And then JWT auth system will validate that token. Inside that token, we have added this claim user ID. So while accessing this secure web API method here, JWT auth system will extract the payload or this user ID claim. So in order to access that user ID here, I'm going to create a new property here. String user ID is equal to user dot claims property can be accessed. Inside that, we just need to call this first function with this lambda expression c such that c dot type is equal to user ID, which we have used for this claim here. Finally, we have to access the value property here, value. Sorry, here we have an extra equal symbol. So using this user ID, we can retrieve the details of user such as first name, email address, username, etc. For that, we just need to do this var user is equal to, actually in order to access those properties from the user table, we have to inject user manager like we have done inside this application user controller here. So here we have injected user manager, sign in manager. We have discussed these injections in previous video tutorial. So in order to inject this user manager, we have to add this property inside the controller constructor. So first of all, let me add a constructor. For that, you can use this snippet ctor, and I will add this constructor property of the type user manager. Now we have to add corresponding namespace here. Now let's create a corresponding private property like we have done here. Let me copy this and pasting here. Underscore user manager is equal to user manager. Now using this user manager property, we can access the user details. So we just need to do this user manager. From that, we can call this function find by ID async function can be called. Since we have an async function, we have to add this keyword await here. Inside this function, we have to pass the user ID. So currently inside this variable, we will have the details of user. Now we just need to return that from this web API method. Return, and we will return a new anonymous object here. First of all, we have full name is equal to user dot full name. In short, we just need to pass this user dot full name. Like this, we can pass email address, user dot email. Then finally we have user name. Now let me build this project again. Now back to the Postman, we are going to make a new GET request. Corresponding URI will be something like this. Let me copy this and pasting here API / user profile. Now along with this request, we have to pass the token that we have received while authenticating the user. So let me copy this token from here, and inside this GET request, go to this authorization tab here. Then we will set the type as, we have to send the token as bearer token. So I will select this option here, and we just need to paste that token here. Now let me send this request. And here we have the response 401 unauthorized. If you go to this header here, you can see the detailed error description. Bearer error, invalid token, error description, the token is expired. So the token that we have used for this request is expired. Inside the login web API method here, we have set the expiration time as 5 minutes. So token will be expired after 5 minutes of creation. I will set it as 1 day. So instead of calling this add minutes function, I will call add days function. The token will be expired after a day. Let me build this project again. After successful build, back to the Postman, let's make this post request again for new token. Send this request. So here we have the new token. Let me copy this and replacing that inside this tab here. Let me make this request again. So here we have the status 200 OK, and here we have the response, which contains information like full name, email address, username of corresponding user. Now we have done with JWT User Authentication inside this .NET Core Web API project. Now let's look how to implement JWT User Authentication inside this Angular 7 project. For that, first of all, we have to submit the user credentials, username and password into this post web method here inside this application user controller login. For that, we can add a submit event for this login form here. So back to the component HTML, login component HTML, I will add a submit event here, submit. When we submit this form, we will call another function on submit. Inside this function call, we will pass this form local reference. Now let's define this on submit function inside this component TypeScript file here. So here we have the function on submit with a single parameter form. It's of the type ng form. Now inside this function, we have to consume this post web method login. For that, I'm going to add a function inside this user service class here. So I will name that function as login. For this function, we will have a single parameter form data. In order to make the post request, we can use this HTTP client object, which we have already injected in previous tutorial. Okay. So in order to post a request, we can use this same statement here. Let me copy this and pasting here. We have to make a post request. Inside this base URI, we have the localhost /API. Along with that, we have to concat this URI here /application user /login. Into this post verb method, we have to pass user credentials, username and password that we can pass into this parameter here. So instead of body, we have form data. As a result of this post function invocation, it will return an observer. So from this function, we will return that observer. So when we call this same login function inside this on submit function, we can subscribe to that. So first of all, we have to inject this user service class inside this login component. So here we have the constructor. I will add a private parameter here, service. It's of the type user service. Now we just need to do this dot service dot login function can be called. Inside that, we have to pass a JSON object containing values from these text boxes, username and password. For that, we just need to do this form dot value property can be passed. From this function, we will return an observer, so we can subscribe to that observer here. So inside this function subscribe, we can have two callback function, one for success. It has a single parameter response. It is of the type any. With second callback function, we can deal error situations. This post request will be similar to this one here. So as a result of the user authentication, successful user authentication, it will return a token, JSON web token. So we have to save that JSON web token inside the browser local storage. For that, we just need to do this local storage dot set item function can be called. As a first parameter, we have to pass the key name, which will be a token. As a second parameter, we have to pass the actual value itself that we can retrieve from this response parameter response.token. As a result of successful authentication, we usually redirect the user into dashboard or home component. So in order to redirect the user, we have to inject router class here. So private router, which is of the type router class. Now we just need to do this dot router dot navigate by URL function can be called. Inside that, we just need to do this /home. Inside this application, we don't have a route path. We will set up that route in a bit. Before that, let me complete this function on submit. So we have done with success case. Now, if there is any error, we have to deal with that inside this second callback function here. From this .NET Core Web API method, we will return a bad request with status 400 with this message: username or password is incorrect if the authentication is failed. So we have to check that here. If this error object contains a property status, so we will compare that here. If it is equal to 400, we have to show the message incorrect username or password. In order to show this notification, I will use the package toaster, which we have configured in previous tutorial. So first of all, we have to inject that toaster service here, private toaster, which is of the type toaster service. Now we can do this dot toaster dot error function can be called. As a first parameter, we can pass the message incorrect username or password. As a title for this notification, we can pass this authentication failed. If there is any other error, we can deal that inside this else block here. We will just console this error object. Console.log function can be called. Inside that, we just need to pass this error object. Now we have to set up this new route path /home. For that, we are going to add a new component, home component. So let me update this application structure here. Currently, our application structure is almost like this. Now for this new route, we have to create a new component home. So let's create this component home. For that, I'm going to open one more terminal here. In order to create this component, you can execute this Angular CLI command ng g for generate c4 component, and we have to create home component, and we have to skip the creation of test file. So I will set this flag spec as false, and also we have to skip the component specific style sheet, so you can use this S flag. Now hit enter. Newly created component can be seen here, home. Now let's add a route for this new component. So here we have the route module. I will add a new path here. Path is equal to /home, and corresponding component is equal to home component. As you can see here, by default, we will be redirected to registration component. Instead of that, I want to redirect the application into login component. Inside this home route, we don't have to provide this / here. Let me remove that. Let me save all of these modifications. Then back to the application here. Now let me try to log in with Linda user record. So username will be Linda123, then password will be 1234. Click on login. Boom. So here we have successfully authenticated inside this application. As a result of that, we are redirected to home component. Inside this home component, we have to list informations of currently logged in user. Before that, I want to add a navbar with logout button. For that, I will copy the navbar from Bootstrap official documentation. So go to this website, getbootstrap.com, click on get started, then search for navbar here. Then I will copy this navbar HTML here, this one, dark one. Let me copy this, and then back to the application here, open home component HTML. I will replace this default paragraph here. Inside this navbar, we will have an anchor element with few classes. First of all, we have navbar -brand Inside this anchor element, we want to show font color as white. So I will add this class text hyphen white. Inside this hyperlink, I will show this application name. It will be something JWT Authentication, in short, auth system. Along with that, we need a logout button. So I will add this button with few classes, btn, then btn hyphen danger. To apply some margin, I will add these two classes, my hyphen 2, then my hyphen sm hyphen 0. Button text will be logout. Let me save all of these modifications here. Then back to the application. So here we have added the navbar with logout button. Now let's check how to log out from this application. For that, I'm going to add a click event for this logout button here. Click. When we click on this button, we will call another function on logout. Now we have to define that logout function inside this TypeScript file here on logout. In order to log out from this application, we have to do the reverse that we have done inside this login function here. So we have added this token into local storage. So we have to remove that during logout operation. So we just need to do this local storage dot remove item function can be called. Inside that, we have to pass the corresponding key value. After logout operation, we have to redirect the user into login page. For that, we have to inject router here. So private router, which is of the type router class. Now we can do this dot router dot navigate function can be called. Inside that, we can pass an array with corresponding route. So it will be /user /login. Let me save all of these modifications. Then back to the application here. Currently we are successfully authenticated inside this application. If you click on this logout button, boom. So here we have logout from this application. Even though you can directly access that home component by typing corresponding path inside this browser URL here. So /home, hit enter. So here we are inside the home component. Now we have to make this path or route as private or secure. So let's look how we can do that. After that, only logged in user can access these private routes. So back to the application. In order to make this route, home route, as private or secure route, we have to implement guards inside this application. So let's look how we can do that. For that, let me update this application structure here. In order to create the route guard, I will create a new file auth. Inside that, we will add this auth guard. Now we have to create a guard. So you can use this Angular CLI command ng g for generate and g for guard, and we have to create that inside this auth folder, and we have to create an auth guard. And in order to skip the creation of test file with extension spec.ts, we can add this flag spec as false. Hit enter. Sorry, here we have a typo. We have to add a space between this G and this auth. So here we have the previous command. I will add a space in between this G and auth. Now hit enter. So here we have the newly created guard inside this auth folder, authguard.ts. So basically this is a class authguard which implement this interface can activate. So we have to define this function can activate inside this class. So this function can return these types of data. So in this application, we only want to return a boolean. So I will remove other types here. So inside this function, we basically need to check whether this user is authenticated or not. If the user is not authenticated, we have to block that user from accessing private routes. We will have this if clause. Inside that, we will check the local storage. Local storage.getItem function can be called, and we have to check for this token If the value is not null, means there is a JSON web token stored inside this local storage. So in that case, we will return true. Otherwise, we have to redirect this user into login page. In order to redirect the user into login page, we have to inject router class here. So I will add the constructor here. For that, we can use this snippet CTOR. We don't need to call this super function. Inside this constructor, we just need to inject that router. So we just need to do this private router, which is of the type router class. Now in order to redirect into login page, we just need to do this dot router dot navigate function can be called. Inside that, we will have an array with this path /user/login. After all, in order to prevent this user from accessing that route, we just need to return false from this clause. Return false. Now in order to make a route as private, we just need to mention that auth guard here. So we have to make this home route as private. So we just need to set this property can activate here with this array. Inside that, we can provide the auth guard. Let me save all of these modifications here. Then back to the application. Currently we are not authenticated inside this application. Now let me try to access this home component. So here we have redirected back to login page because we are not authenticated inside this application. If you try to log in inside this application with Linda record, now we can access this home component. When an user is already authenticated, we have to prevent that user from accessing this login page here. So in order to prevent this, we have to update the corresponding component ng-only lifecycle hook. So here we have the login component and here we have the ng-only lifecycle hook. Inside this, we will check whether this user is logged in or not. For that, we can do the same like we have done inside this can activate function here. Let me copy this and pasting here. If the user is already authenticated, we have to redirect that user into home page. For that, we need a router instance which we have already injected here. So we can do this dot router dot navigate by URL function can be called. Inside that, we just need to pass this path /home. Let me save all of these modifications here. Then back to the application. Currently we are authenticated inside this application. If you try to access the login page again, we will be redirected to home page. Now inside this home component, we have to show details of currently logged in user. For that, we can consume this web API method which we have created inside this user profile controller, get user profile. Now the key to access this web method, we have to append the JWT token which we have saved inside this local storage. So let's look how we can do that. For that, we will add a new function inside this service class here, get user profile. So here we have to make a get request. So we can do this dot http dot get function can be called. As a first parameter to this function, we have to pass the URI. So you can do this dot base URI. Into that, we have to concat this /user profile. Now let's look how to append the JWT token into this request. For that, I will create a new variable here, token header is equal to new HTTP headers with a single attribute authorization. Authorization is equal to, first of all, we have to add this prefix bearer then a space, then we have to concat that actual JWT token. In order to access that, you can do this local storage dot get item function can be called, and we have to provide the corresponding key value token. Now we can pass this token header as a second parameter here. So we will have a JSON object. Inside that we can do this headers is equal to token header. As a result of this get function invocation, it will return an observer. So we can return that observable from this function. Now let's call this function get user profile inside this home component here that we can do inside this ng on a lifecycle hook. So first of all, we have to inject the user service class here, private service, which is of the type user service class. Now we can do this dot service dot get user profile function can be called. It will return an observer, so we can subscribe to that observer here. It will have two callback function, one for success and one for error. So let me copy this and pasting below that for error callback function, corresponding parameter will be something like this. Inside this error callback function, I will just print that error object into console. So we can call this function console.log. Inside that we just need to pass this error object. Inside this response parameter, we will have an object similar to this one here. So in order to save that, I'm going to create a new parameter here, user details. And I will initialize that property inside this success callback function. This dot user details is equal to response. Sorry, here we have a typo. Instead of route, we have to use this class router. Okay. Now we have to show these user details like full name, email address, and username inside this home component HTML here. So in order to display user details here, I'm going to use card from Bootstrap. So we can have this div with class card. Along with that, we will have this class m-5 to apply margin from all sides. And for this div, I want to set a custom width. So I will add this style attribute width is equal to 18 rem. We only want to show this div when this property is already populated. This one, user details. So we can add this ngIf directive here. ngIf is equal to user details. Inside this div, in order to show all of these information, I will use list from Bootstrap. So we can have this ul element with this class list hyphen group. Inside this list, we can add list item with this class list hyphen group hyphen item. Inside that, we can have each information that we have returned from the server. So first of all, I will add this strong element. Inside that, we can have username is equal to, now we have to show this property here, username. Actually, from this web API method, we have returned this username with this property name username. Here we have a difference. Here we have small u and here we have capital U. Same for other properties also. So the response returned from the web API method will be camel cased, means first letter will be in small letter, other words starting letter will be in capital letter. For full name, we have capital F here, and here inside this response we have small f. So by default from .NET Core Web API project, the response JSON object property will be camel cased. So inside this li element here, we have to show that. For that, we can use the property user details dot username Like this, we have to show remaining properties also. So let me copy this and pasting below that 2 times. Here we have full name and corresponding property will be full name. And finally we have email, corresponding property will be email. Let me save all of these modifications here. Then back to the application here. So here we have the currently logged in user details. Username is equal to Linda123. Full name will be Linda Thomas. We did not provide email address for this user. Now back to this Angular 7 application here. In order to append this JSON web token inside this user service function here, we have created this token header. For a big enterprise application, in order to access most of the web API method, we should be authenticated. So we have to repeatedly send this or append this JWT token to every such request. In order to avoid this repeated operation, we can use HttpInterceptor from Angular. Now let's look how to add HttpInterceptor to handle this operation at one place for this whole application. For that, we have to create a new file inside this auth folder here. So first of all, let me update this application structure here. App structure.txt. Inside this same auth folder, I will add a new TypeScript file, auth-interceptor.ts. Let me copy this. And inside this auth folder, we can create a new file. I will name this as auth.interceptor.ts. And basically inside this file, we have to create a new class. So I will start with export statement, export class, and I will name this class as auth-interceptor. And we have to inherit this from HttpInterceptor. So we can do this implements HttpInterceptor. In order to make this class injectable in another places, we have to add this decorator injectable. Since we have inherited this class from this interface HttpInterceptor, we have to define the function intercept inside this class here. In order to see the signature of that function, you can right click on this interface here, then go to definition. So here we have the function intercept. Let me copy this and back to this file here. I will paste that here. Now let's fix the import statement. Hold Control, then press period. Then we have HTTP handler, then observer, and HTTP event. Now inside this function, we have to append that JSON web token. So all of the HTTP requests inside this application will be passed through this intercept function. So first of all, we will check whether this user is logged in or not. So we can use this if clause here. Local storage dot get item function can be called. Inside that, we will check this key. If it is not equal to null, we can append the token into the request. So inside this request parameter, we have the request which we have made inside this application. Now into this HTTP request, we have to add the authorization header, but this request instance is read-only. So in order to add that, we have to clone this request or replicate this user, and then we can add the header authorization. So first of all, I will create a constant and I will name this as cloned request is equal to request dot clone function can be called. Inside this function, we have to pass an object, and inside this object we will set the authorization header. So we can do this. Headers is equal to request dot headers dot set function can be called here. Inside that, we can pass the authorization header authorization, as a second parameter, we have to pass the token. So we have this prefix bearer, then space, and here we have to concat that token from local storage dot get item, and here we have the key token. So here we have a copy of the current request. Now in order to process this new request, we just need to do this return. We can call handle function from this next parameter here. So next dot handle function can be called. Inside that we can pass this clone request. After processing this request, we can handle some common errors inside this HTTP interceptor. For that, we just need to call this pipe function from RxJS. Inside that, we can call another function tab. Now for this tab function, we have to add the import statement manually. So import statement, we have to import that from RxJS operators, and we have to import tab. Now inside this tab function, we can have two callback function, one for success and one for error. One of the common errors that we have to handle inside this HTTP interceptor will be 401 unauthorized request. It might be due to token expiration or something else. So first of all, we will add this if clause. Inside that, we can check this status if status is equal to 401. I will redirect the user into login page. Instead of that, you can show toaster notification with detailed error also. So in order to redirect this user to login page, first of all, we have to inject router here. So I will add the private parameter here, private router, which is of the type router class, and we can do this dot navigate by URL function can be called. Inside that, we just need to do this /user/login. So this is how we can append this JSON web token at one place using HTTP interceptor instead of doing that for each function inside this service class here. So we can remove that from here. It will be added into this request from the HTTP interceptor here. Inside this else block, we just need to process the current request that we can do here. Else return next dot handle function can be called here, and we just need to clone the current request dot clone function can be called. Here also you can handle some common errors inside this application by using these two functions pipe and tab from RxJS. Now here we have just created an interceptor. Now we have to mention this interceptor inside this app.module.ts file here. For that, you just need to add an object inside this providers array like this. It will have these properties provide, use class and multi, and we have to add corresponding import statement here. That's it. Now let me save all of these modifications and back to the application. So here we have fetched logged in user informations using HTTP interceptor also. Now inside this if clause, we have to do one more thing before redirecting the user to login component. We have to remove the token from local storage. So local storage dot remove item function can be called, and we have to remove this token. Let me save this and back to the application. Before winding up this tutorial, I want to show one more thing. Since we are authenticated inside this application, corresponding JSON web token will be stored inside this browser local storage. You can see that inside this browser. For that, you just need to right click here, then inspect, then go to this application tab here, and here we have the local storage for this website localhost 4200. So here we have the token that we have received for this currently logged in user. So here we have the first part, header part. After that we have payload, and finally we have signature. Like we have discussed, both header and payload is encoded. So you can see the information that is represented by this string here. For example, let me copy this and then back to the console. In order to decode that, we can do this. Window.atob function can be called. Inside that, we just need to pass that copied header. Enter. So here we have the JSON object corresponding to that encoded string. Like that, you can decode this payload here. I can copy this second part from this token back to the console window. I will replace that here, hit enter. So here we have the payload that we have sent from our web API project. So this is why we are saying do not store security informations like password inside payload. And the last part of this token, which is signature, can't be decrypted in client side because it is encrypted using a secret code in our server. As long as that secret is kept as a secret inside the server, no one can decrypt this signature here. So that is the benefit of using JSON Web Token. With this signature, it will maintain its integrity. For example, inside this application, we have stored the JSON Web Token. If someone manipulates this token from this local storage here, suppose if I delete few characters from this token, then hit enter, it will be saved inside the local storage. And if I reload this page here, we will be redirected to user or login page, because inside this HTTP interceptor, as a result of validating that JSON Web Token inside the server, it will detect the change that we have made from our client side. As part of that, it will return a 401 response, and thereby we will be redirected to login page. So this is how JSON Web Token authentication maintains its security and integrity in these applications. You can download this project source code from the GitHub link given below in video description. In order to make more helpful and quality tutorials like this, you can support me through PayPal. I have given the PayPal donation link in video description and first comment. In this video, we have discussed login and logout in .NET Core Web API with Angular 7 using JSON Web Token User Authentication. If you found this video helpful, please thumbs up this video, and for more awesome videos like this, please be subscribed to this channel CodAffection. Please like and share this video with your friends and colleagues so that they can benefit from this. Have a nice day. Bye.